A blessed day, everyone. I am Jamela, and welcome again to Book and I. It is a program that will look on different books and their insights, which will help us to grow more in faith and practice. Today, we have another book where we will dwell on for many weeks again. And the title of that book is Center Church by Mr. Timothy Keller. If you still remember our previous book, we already discussed one of Mr. Keller's books that gives us reason for God. Now, this book highlights the need of having theological vision that, as Mr. Keller defines, is a faithful restatement of the gospel with rich implications on life, ministry, and mission in a type of culture at a moment in history. With this in mind, let's start our new journey and learnings with this book. This book has 30 chapters which were divided into 8 parts with 3 main topics as the head of this. These 3 main topics were about the gospel, the city, and the movement. The relativity of these 3 must be well balanced in a theological vision, lest churches fall on certain extremes. For today's episode, we will only tackle the first chapter of this book, which tells us that the gospel is not everything. Sounds controversial? Well, I encourage you to read the book to understand what the author means. What do we mean by the gospel? Answering this question is very essential, especially for the church, for we must know that not everything that the Bible teaches can be considered the gospel. Again, the gospel is a message about how we have been rescued from the peril. And this chapter enumerates what the gospel is and what is not. First, let us go to what is not the gospel. The gospel is not about good advice. It does not primarily tell us about the way of living we must have or something that we must do, but it proclaims what has been done for us and something we must respond to, as said by the author. We must be mindful of the distinction between the gospel and the result of the gospel. Yes, it is true that because of the gospel, there will be a whole new way of life for everyone who believes in it. Yet, it is only the result of the gospel and not the gospel itself. Now, how does this book define what is the gospel? The gospel is the good news announcing that we have been rescued or saved from the wrath of God. This is the greatest problem of human condition. Since the fall, God's curse lies on the entire created order because of sin. When we become alienated with God, we become alienated within ourselves, alienated from one another, and alienated from the nature. All fall apart, and at the end of age, we will heap God's judgment on us, where we will be forever separated from Him on the lake of fire. God saves us from this, and this is the good news that the gospel proclaims. And not only that, the gospel is also the news that tells us what has been done by Jesus Christ to put right our relationship with God. Becoming a Christian is a change of status. We have passed from death to life. And this change in our status lies not on what we do, but on what has been done by our Lord Jesus Christ. There will be times that as Christians, we will feel that we are not good enough. And that is right. We will never be good enough. Like what Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones says, the essence of Christian salvation is to say that He is good enough and that I am in Him. It is not the amount of faith that saves us. Please remind ourselves of that truth every day. But it is the object of our faith. And because of this good news, not only will our souls be saved, but because of Him, we can hope for the renewal of everything in this world. There is hope for this world. And it is not by having faith in humanity as what the popular quotation says. But we have hope because God cares for this world, that He gave His only Son Jesus to live and die and rose again on high. And this chapter ends with a reminder to all ministers and servants of the Lord that every form of ministry is empowered by the gospel, based on the gospel, and is a result of the gospel. If the gospel is not the center of our ministry, we will surely fall on the extremes that this chapter addresses. Either we become legalistic or antinomian. The ministry, especially the people involved, must be tuned to the Lord. Again, let this quotation from the book reminds us again of what is the gospel and what it does to us. The gospel is heraldic proclamation before it is anything else. It is news that creates a life of love, but the life of love is not itself the gospel. The gospel is not everything that we believe, do, or say. The gospel must primarily be understood as good news, and the news is not as much about what we must do as about what has been done. The gospel is preeminently a report about the work of Christ on our behalf, salvation accomplished for us. That's how it is a gospel of grace. And that is the start of the book that we will discuss for many weeks. Hope you learned something and may the peace of Christ be with us all. Again, this is Book and I.